You did not become compassionate. You became fluent in your own disappearance. And because the disappearance made other people calmer, you learned to call it love. The word compassion arrived early, wrapped in praise and usefulness. It softened a room, lowered a voice, restored warmth to a face that had turned cold. Each time peace returned, something small left your body, and because no one named the loss, you mistook the exchange for virtue. You told yourself you were sensitive, perceptive, unusually able to feel what others felt. Part of that was true, but beneath the gift was another movement, older and quieter, serving a different purpose. You were not always feeling another person's emotion. Sometimes you were absorbing it so they would not have to carry it alone. You metabolized what belonged to them because the room felt safer when their unrest became yours. You called this compassion because no other word was available that did not expose the arrangement. To call it fear would have felt unkind. To call it self-erasure would have threatened the identity that kept you close to people. So you chose the nobler name. And for a long time, the nobler name protected you. It let you remain the understanding one, the patient one, the person who could always find the wound beneath the harm. It also kept you from asking what the harm was costing you. Now, years later, the body begins to speak in a language the mind can no longer edit. You leave certain conversations tired in a way sleep does not repair. You put down the phone and notice your shoulders dropping from a posture you did not know you were holding. Your jaw carries sentences you never spoke. Your chest holds a weight after every exchange with certain people, and you have been calling that weight care. Perhaps care is present, but it is not the whole story. The other word is residue. Something has crossed from them into you and has not crossed back. You accepted the transfer because refusing it might have made you seem selfish, difficult, unloving, or unlike the person everyone depended upon. You built an identity around being the one who understood without needing to be understood. The identity became so respected, so useful, and so quietly rewarded that you stopped noticing what you paid for it. You paid with preference, appetite, anger, and the small no that dies when it is not spoken often enough. From a Jungian perspective, what you called compassion slowly became a persona built to keep attachment stable. A persona is not simply a false mask. It is the shape a psyche learns to take when one version of the self is welcomed and the rest is met with silence, tension, or withdrawal. Your compassion was real, but it was recruited into service. It had a first job, which was to care. It had a second job, which was to keep the relationship from ever being tested by truth. The second job was subtle. It asked you to interpret the other person before you felt yourself. It asked you to search for the childhood wound beneath their cruelty, the fear beneath their coldness, the shame beneath their refusal to meet you. This interpretation protected them from consequence. It also protected you from the terrifying possibility of discovering what the relationship was without your softening in the middle of it. As long as you could explain them, you did not have to grieve them. Beneath your generosity lived a quiet bargain. If I continue to see them at their best, I will not have to face who they are at their least available. If I keep loving their potential, I can postpone the question of whether they are capable of meeting me now. The bargain preserved mothers, fathers, partners, friendships, and entire families. It kept the structure recognizable. It also required you to edit reality until disappointment could be mistaken for depth. You became the translator. You found the frightened child inside the adult who was hurting you, and you loved that child on behalf of the adult who would not take responsibility. You called this seeing them clearly. Sometimes it was clarity. Sometimes it was editing them into a version you could continue loving without losing the bond. Your compassion did not only comfort them, it performed the grieving you were not yet ready to feel. Then something begins to fail, and at first you think the failure is in your heart. A friend says something diminishing, and for once you do not immediately search for the pain beneath it. A parent uses the old tone, and your body does not rearrange itself into the familiar receptive shape. A partner withdraws, and instead of inventing a tender explanation, you notice the withdrawal itself. You are not becoming cold, you are becoming accurate. Accuracy feels cruel when you have spent a lifetime trading it for closeness. Someone hurts you, and instead of feeling their side first, you feel your own side. The sensation is almost illegal. Guilt arrives quickly and asks whether you are becoming selfish, bitter, or less evolved. But what is disappearing is not your capacity to love. What is disappearing is the version of you that made unhealthy arrangements comfortable enough to continue. This pattern began before you had language for it. It began in a room where one person's emotional weather set the temperature for everyone else. Perhaps a mother's sadness filled the kitchen before breakfast. Perhaps a father's silence had edges the whole house learned to avoid. Perhaps tension lived in the walls before anyone raised a voice. You learned the atmosphere the way a child learns a native tongue, through immersion rather than instruction. Someone in that room carried a feeling too large for them to contain alone. You were small, permeable, observant, and eager for the room to breathe again. You offered the only surface available yourself. No child consciously chooses such a role. A child notices what restores safety and repeats it until the behavior becomes indistinguishable from identity. What restored safety was your softness, in your attention, and your ability to receive what others could not bear to feel. You became the household's emotional metabolizer. You took in what others could not digest and processed it silently in your own body. The role cost you, but it also paid you, and the payment was impossible to refuse because the currency was belonging. You were needed. You were trusted. You became the one they came to, the one whose usefulness guaranteed a place in the room. In a family where love felt uneven, usefulness became the most reliable path to being kept. The role did not feel like a cage. It felt like a passage into attachment. You did not recognize yourself as walking a path because you had never known another way to belong. Compassion grew toward the available light and became refined, intelligent, and automatic. It could adjust in the middle of a sentence. It could sense what someone needed before they knew it themselves. It could locate the hurt beneath the harm while leaving the harm unnamed. This was often what people meant when they said you were wise beyond your years. They were describing the sophistication of a survival strategy so complete that it appeared to be character, because it was praised. You had every reason to keep perfecting it. The role followed you out of the childhood home, It entered friendships and made you the person everyone confided in but rarely asked about. It entered work and made your own difficulty invisible because the difficulty of others always appeared more urgent. It entered love and made you devoted to hidden possibilities. You found the wounded boy inside the difficult man, the frightened girl inside the withholding woman, the abandoned child inside the adult who kept abandoning you. You loved the invisible figure with a devotion the visible adult had not earned. You called this depth, and sometimes it was, but it was also a way to remain in relationships that could not survive the plain question, is what I am receiving enough? At some level, you already knew the answer. Knowing it fully would have required movement, and movement once felt unbearable. You could leave, which the old pattern forbade, or stay and grieve, which the old pattern had trained you to postpone. So you found a third path. You interpreted, you translated absence into complexity, coldness into woundedness, withholding into fear, and unavailability into a soul waiting to awaken. Each generous interpretation became a deposit into an invisible account. You hoped that if you understood them deeply enough, patiently enough, and long enough, they would eventually understand you. Compassion became an investment in reciprocity. The return rarely arrived, but the possibility of its arrival kept the devotion alive. This is why potential can become such a cruel object of love. Potential never has to become present in order to continue receiving your faith. Jung might have understood this as a subtle projection. You were not merely projecting darkness onto another person. You were often projecting your own tenderness, conscience, and capacity for depth onto them. You recognized what lived richly in you and assumed it must be sleeping somewhere inside them. Their potential became the screen on which your own unlived goodness appeared. You kept waiting for them to reveal the qualities you had been bringing to the relationship all along. The connection remained intact, but often it was a connection between two incomplete figures. You were meeting the person you believed they could become. They were meeting the function you had learned to perform. The bond was real, yet parts of both people remained absent from it. Over time, that absence produced a loneliness no amount of closeness could repair. Two interpretations sat across the table while the unperformed self waited outside the room. Now the interpreter inside you is becoming tired. The old explanation still appears, but it arrives later, and in the delay another feeling finally has room to exist. Sometimes it is anger, sometimes it is grief, sometimes it is disgust at how many years were spent making another person palatable to your own conscience. The refusal to explain them is not a failure of love. It is the psyche withdrawing from labor. It can no longer perform without injury. Anger becomes especially difficult because compassion once served as an anger prevention system. It kept you soft enough to avoid naming what had happened. It kept the image of the good, patient, spiritually evolved self intact. Now anger arrives without permission, not always loud, but cold and precise. It is the anger of someone who has finally added the numbers and discovered that the balance never favored them. It does not necessarily want revenge. It wants reality. Some of that anger points toward parents, partners, friends, or people you defended for years. The more difficult anger points toward the adult self who continued repeating the old arrangement after new choices slowly became possible. This does not mean the adult was freely choosing from a place of safety. The nervous system often repeats the only path it has ever trusted, even when other paths exist. Yet healing eventually asks for participation. It asks you to see where survival became habit and where habit became consent without awareness. The shadow has been waiting for this recognition. You were not only the sensitive one who understood, you were also the one who could not bear to discover what would happen if understanding stopped. You kept softening because softening was cheaper than grief. You kept translating because translation allowed hope to remain alive. You preserved the wounded child inside them because losing that image might have forced you to meet the adult who was actually standing in front of you. Compassion became a form of hope management. As long as you could locate goodness beneath the behavior, you could postpone the death of the fantasy. You could continue believing that one day they would meet you with the same depth you had offered them. Losing the fantasy felt more final than losing the person. You would rather have understood them for a lifetime than grieve them for an afternoon. That was not stupidity. It was the intelligence of a psyche that once could not afford grief. But the strategy now costs more than it protects. Your body has been keeping the ledger even when your mind refused to read it. It speaks through tiredness after certain visits, relief when plans are cancelled, dread before answering familiar names, and the strange flatness that follows encounters that were supposed to feel intimate. These signs may coexist with depression, work, exhaustion, introversion, or physical causes, but those explanations may not tell the whole story. Sometimes the body is also protesting a role it no longer consents to perform. A deeper recognition follows. Some of the people you have loved most patiently do not fully know you. They know the translator, the softener, the one who arrives when they need emotional space. They know how available you can become under pressure. They may not know what you want when no one is asking you to accommodate them. They may not know the face you have when it is not arranged for their comfort. This recognition often appears in moments that should feel warm. A birthday, a holiday, a milestone, a room filled with genuine affection. You look around and realize that some of the affection is directed toward a function you have performed. The love may be real, but it has not yet reached all of you. You have been loved for your labor, and the labor was so beautiful and refined that no one, including you, could easily distinguish it from presence. This is where the shadow reversal becomes complete. You were not only being used, you were also using the role to secure a place in rooms where belonging did not feel guaranteed. You paid for attachment with a currency renewed every day, and the currency was your partial absence from yourself. The transaction was mutual, unspoken, and often unconscious. Seeing this is painful because it removes the comfort of complete innocence. But the purpose is not shame. The purpose is to recover choice. You did what you had to do, then you kept doing it long after you no longer had to, because the nervous system had not yet learned that the emergency was over. There is no clean replacement waiting for the old arrangement. You cannot simply become cold, unreachable, or indifferent. That would be another performance organized around the same fear of grief. The task is not to reverse the persona. The task is to let the full self enter the relationship. This creates an interval that can feel empty. You can no longer return completely to the old role. Yet the new way of relating is not fully formed. The translator is quieter, but your own voice may still feel unfamiliar. The pause before answering becomes longer. The urge to respond immediately weakens. You begin asking whether care is freely given or automatically extracted. This pause is not emptiness. It is the first space in which consent can appear. People around you may notice before you can explain. Someone may say you have become quiet, distant, selfish, changed, or unlike yourself. The old guilt will reach for you with familiar hands. It will tell you that kindness requires returning to the former arrangement. But guilt is not always proof that you have done something wrong. Sometimes guilt is the sensation produced when an old role is no longer being performed. At times, what others miss first is not your full presence, but the emotional structure your presence maintained. They may genuinely believe they miss you, and in part they may, yet they may also miss the ease created by your constant interpretation, availability, and forgiveness in advance. This does not make them evil. It means the relationship had adapted around a function you provided. When the function changes, the relationship is forced to reveal whether it can become more mutual. You may feel compelled to explain yourself immediately. You may want to reassure everyone that you still care, that you have not become cruel, that this is only a small pause, a small boundary, a small attempt to feel your own side first. Do not rush to explain before you understand the change yourself. Explanation can become the old arrangement, wearing more sophisticated clothes. It can become another attempt to make your transformation comfortable for the people most disturbed by it. Your change does not need universal approval in order to be real. Some people will adjust. Their love will find its way toward the new shape of you, awkwardly and imperfectly. They will make mistakes, and so will you. They will discover that your boundary is not abandonment and that your silence is not punishment. The relationship may become smaller in performance, but deeper in reality. Others may continue asking for the old version of you. They may not know how to relate without your constant availability. Their resistance may not be malicious. It may be the grief of losing an arrangement they did not realize they depended upon. You may grieve them while they are still present, which is one of the strangest forms of grief. You may love them and see their limits at the same time. The seeing does not necessarily destroy love. It changes what love is asked to do. Love is no longer required to translate, rescue, excuse, or sustain a fantasy. It is asked only to be love, which may feel smaller than what you once gave, yet it is more honest because it does not demand your disappearance. Compassion remains, but the compulsion begins to loosen. This is the distinction that changes everything. Compassion is freely given. Compulsion arrives before choice. Compassion can include a boundary. Compulsion experiences every boundary as betrayal. Compassion sees another person's wound without making the wound an excuse for repeated harm. Compulsion believes understanding someone creates an obligation to continue absorbing them. As the compulsion weakens, your care returns to you in a different form. It arrives in your timing, with your consent, toward situations that can receive it without consuming you. It is no longer currency used to purchase belonging, it becomes a gift. Currency must be spent in order to keep the transaction alive. A gift can be withheld without cruelty when giving it would require abandoning the giver. The first time you withhold the old reflex, guilt may rise immediately. Beneath the guilt, however, there may be a quiet you have never known. The quiet appears in the jaw, the chest, and the space behind the eyes where an interpretation used to wait before it was needed. This quiet is not emotional coldness. It is the sound of a psyche no longer translating a room. It was never obligated to translate. It is the beginning of interior life. You will not always know what to do with that quiet. Familiar suffering has gravity, and truth does not always feel familiar enough to trust. There will be days when you miss the old role because it gave you identity, purpose, and a guaranteed place. You may interpret someone generously and only later recognize the old exhaustion returning. This is not failure. A pattern built over decades does not disappear in a single act of insight. The deeper self is not demanding that you become another person. It is asking that the person hidden beneath usefulness be allowed to stand inside your life without apology. You had preferences before anyone asked what you wanted. You had limits before anyone called them selfish. You had a no that would not have destroyed the world, though the child in you once believed it might. That hidden life is beginning to speak. It does not always speak dramatically. It speaks in the pause before you answer. It speaks in the sentence you do not soften, the interpretation you do not offer, the message you return when you are ready rather than when guilt commands you. It speaks in leaving a room earlier, declining a role you no longer want, and allowing your face to remain unarranged for someone else's comfort. These acts may appear small. They are the shape of a life beginning to belong to the person living it. You may still love the same people. You may still miss those who cannot follow you into a more honest arrangement. You may continue to feel tenderness toward the wounds that once made you excuse everything. None of this invalidates the change. Healing does not require contempt for the people you once understood too much. It requires that your understanding no longer be used as a weapon against yourself. The compassion was never the enemy. The enemy was the unconscious rule that compassion must always cost you something essential. The enemy was the belief that love becomes pure only when the self disappears. The enemy was the bargain that made belonging dependent on emotional labor no one was required to acknowledge. Once the bargain is seen, it cannot remain entirely innocent. It must either become conscious or begin to dissolve. You are not becoming less loving. You are learning that love without self-presence eventually becomes performance. You are learning that empathy without choice becomes absorption. You are learning that understanding another person does not obligate you to remain available for their unexamined behavior. You are learning that compassion can witness pain without volunteering to become its container. These are not signs that your heart is closing. They are signs that your heart is returning to its rightful place. The old self-abandonment wore compassion's clothes for so long that removing them may initially feel like removing compassion itself. But compassion is still there beneath the borrowed garment. It is quieter now, less automatic, and more precise. It no longer begs to be recognized as goodness. It no longer needs to purchase a place in the room. It is simply what you offer when offering it does not require you to disappear. And perhaps this is the final reversal. You did not lose your finest quality. You rescued it from the task it was never meant to perform. Compassion was never supposed to erase consequence, preserve fantasy, or keep every relationship intact. It was never meant to be the price of admission into love. It was meant to move through a self that remained present. So the work is not to stop caring. The work is to stop calling your absence care. It is to notice when understanding becomes avoidance, when forgiveness becomes fear, and when kindness becomes a way of bargaining with abandonment. It is to let grief complete what interpretation once postponed. It is to allow truth to end what compassion was forced to keep alive. You did not become cold. You stopped volunteering your inner life as a place where everyone else's unfinished emotions could be stored. You did not become selfish. You stopped treating your own existence as the least important fact in every room. You did not stop loving. You stopped paying for love with the parts of yourself that were never supposed to become currency.